The U.S. Environmental Protection Agency issues new auto rules with the hope of speeding up America's transition to electric vehicles. What it could mean for gas-powered cars in the future. We'll explain. Plus, Wall Street's top regulatory body is taking some heat over its new environmental policy. And Google inks a landmark renewable energy agreement. We'll have more on the company's efforts to find carbon-cutting solutions. Hello and welcome to EarthX News, where we focus on sustainability, conservation, and the environment. I'm Christina Thompson. Let's get into some of the biggest headlines facing our planet. The Biden administration announced regulations that could lead to the phase-out of new gasoline-powered cars. The EPA created new limits on tailpipe emissions that calls for a 56% reduction in fleet-wide average carbon emissions by 2032. Industry analysts say the move, which is set to begin in the model year 2027, constitutes the strictest ever limit on pollution from the nation's cars and light trucks. The new standards do not mandate the sale of particular kinds of vehicles, but by 2032, the EPA says latest regulations will mean EVs will make up 35 to 56% of sales. Now, that's a big jump, considering electric vehicles made up just 7.6% of new car sales last year. Senior administration officials say by the time the rule is fully implemented in 2055, it will have cumulatively slashed over 7 billion tons of carbon dioxide emissions. Federal officials also say the new rules will help combat toxic pollution, slashing fine particulate emissions by 95% and emissions of nitrogen oxides and volatile organic compounds by 75%. The regulations are expected to be promptly challenged in court by a coalition of fossil fuel companies and Republican attorneys generals, potentially reaching the Supreme Court. Oil and gas industry groups are looking to take the Securities and Exchange Commission to court. Companies in the fossil fuel sector are filing a federal lawsuit against the SEC over its new climate disclosure policy in federal court. The legal challenge comes just after Wall Street's top regulatory body issued a corporate emissions reporting mandate on March 6th. The new rules would, for the first time, force companies to disclose their direct emissions and the emissions linked to their energy purchases. The Texas Alliance of Energy Producers and the Domestic Energy Producers Alliance filed the petition seeking a review of the SEC's rules. The lawsuit calls into question the agency's authority to create regulations without Congress's authorization. It's currently one of 3 suits against the SEC that's pending in the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit over the climate policy. The U.S. Supreme Court heard arguments recently over whether to freeze a U.S. environmental policy called the Good Neighbor Plan. Logan Ratnick has more.
The EPA's Good Neighbor Rule restricts smokestack emissions from power plants and other industrial sources. The EPA says that in the 10 states enforcing the rule, power plant emissions fell 18% in 2023. But 3 energy-producing states, Ohio, Indiana, and West Virginia, are challenging the rule, calling it costly and ineffective. In their suit in the D.C. Court of Appeals, they argue that the EPA violated a federal law aimed at ensuring that agency actions are reasonable. The states challenging the rule argue that the EPA's plan to provide a national solution to ozone pollution relies on the assumption that all 23 states targeted by the rule would participate. The conservative majority Supreme Court has increasingly reined in the powers of federal agencies, including the EPA, in recent years. And if you listen to Justice Brett Kavanaugh, the court appears set to do so again.
The EPA understood the comment and came back and said, even if we have fewer states, we're going to plow ahead anyway. And then the question I think that's raised is why and how? And that's just kind of pretend nothing happened, just go ahead with the 11 states.
Industry groups argue that the EPA's rule has an anti-coal bias that will drive up the cost of electricity, and they believe that the Supreme Court will take that into account when it casts a decision later this year. Logan Ratnick, Washington.
Logan, thank you. The Environmental Protection Agency is facing some pushback over its new standards for soot pollution. 24 states and a number of business groups have filed lawsuits against the agency trying to block that rule. The EPA's policy, which was finalized in February, aims to cut particulate matter by 25% from 12 micrograms per cubic meter to 9. The joint lawsuit from the states argued the new policy would raise costs for manufacturers, utilities, and families, and could also block new manufacturing plants and infrastructure such as roads and bridges. The agency says the stricter policy could help prevent hundreds of thousands of health-related lost workdays. Under the rule, states will have to implement policies to improve air quality in parts of the country that currently don't meet the limit for soot pollution set by the new requirements. Meantime, the EPA says it expects that 99% of U.S. counties will be able to meet the revised annual standard by 2032. However, industry groups and some officials dispute that, arguing a lower soot limit could put hundreds of U.S. counties out of compliance. A California man was charged with smuggling greenhouse gases from Mexico into the U.S. in a first-of-a-kind case. According to a statement from the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of California, this is the first such prosecution in the U.S. The San Diego man was charged with smuggling hydrofluorocarbons, or HFCs, greenhouse gases normally used in refrigeration and air conditioning, from Mexico. HFCs are also used in building insulation, fire extinguishing systems, and aerosols. In 2016, several nations agreed to cut down on the use of HFCs to try and curb greenhouse gases. So now, HFCs can only be imported into the country with permission from the Environmental Protection Agency. He allegedly smuggled them into the U.S. by hiding them under a tarp and tools in the back of his truck. He then allegedly sold them through websites such as Facebook Marketplace. The man pleaded not guilty to 13 charges that carry a potential prison sentence ranging from 5 to 15 years. An EV charging station company goes bankrupt. Charge Enterprises filed for Chapter 11 in order to create a restructuring plan that will transfer control of the business to lender, Arena Investors. Now, as part of the deal, the asset management firm agreed to provide financing worth as much as $10 million to facilitate the bankruptcy process. Charge Enterprises attributes its bankruptcy to issues dealing with investment advisor Core Acquisitions Group. The EV maker claims it was supposed to have access to $10 million to repay debts in November, but the funds were not available. Charge Enterprises has since filed a lawsuit against the financial firm and its former chairman. The Acquisitions Group argues the complaint lacks legal merit. The public company's move marks the fourth bankruptcy filing within the electric vehicle sector in recent years. You might remember electric vehicle maker Lordstown Motors Corporation and EV parts maker Proterra filed for Chapter 11 last year, as well as EV startup Electric Last Mile Solutions, who went bankrupt in 2022. Turning now to international news. The European Union is urging the fossil fuel sector to fork over some cash to help developing nations fight climate change. In an attempt to address the spiraling costs of deadly heat waves, droughts, and rising sea levels, the bloc's ministers of foreign affairs issued a joint statement saying the EU, quote, calls for additional new and innovative sources of finance from a wide variety of sources, including from the fossil fuel sector and other high-emission sectors, to be identified and utilized to provide climate finance. France's top economic official is blasting some of the European Union's methods to achieving its climate goals. Bruno Le Maire, the country's finance minister, recently criticized the European Commission's renewable energy targets, plus the bloc itself, saying, quote, "We no longer want a Europe that sets targets for wind turbines here and for solar there. We want a Europe that sets clear climate targets, while leaving member states free to determine their own energy mix to achieve that goal." France will continue to develop renewables and seek to further curb fossil fuels through energy-saving measures. Le Maire's comments come after Paris signed on to EU's legislation, which says the bloc must collectively reach a 42.5% share of renewable energy by 2030. Under the terms agreed to last March, France was to achieve a renewable share of at least 44%. And though it has said to be missing the renewable target, the country's heavy reliance on nuclear power means it is more than hitting overall carbon reduction goals. France derives 65% of its energy from nuclear and is continuing to build more reactors. The European Commission has warned the country to reconsider its plans. Le Maire's response was, quote, "We will find a solution with the European Commission." Singapore is incorporating some innovative ways for local cities to beat the heat. In a series of moves to reduce temperatures in urban areas, the island country has linked together a network of green spaces within a major park in the city Bishan. Officials say the network helps keep the recreation area 3 degrees cooler than the high-density residential blocks in the middle of the city. In another residential district, media reports say the island nation constructed buildings to avoid directly facing the sun in order to cool indoor temperatures. And in Singapore's Marina Bay, multiple buildings are cooled down at once by running chilled water through a network of insulated pipes. Singapore is also offering incentives to incorporate greenery, like rooftop gardens and vertical green exteriors, into buildings. Officials say the added foliage would work as natural blinds, shading the structure and insulating the building's material from the heat, reducing the need for air conditioning. Some amazing work going on there. Google is bolstering its commitment to renewable energy. The tech giant recently announced it signed its largest offshore power purchase agreement with offshore wind projects in the Netherlands. Under the terms of Google's biggest PPA to date, the company agreed to take 478 megawatts of power from 2 new wind farms developed by 2 Dutch companies, which are joint ventures between energy companies Shell and Dutch utility Eneco. The company said the move was part of its efforts to green its power supply and hit climate targets. Google also announced smaller renewable PPAs in Italy, Portland, and Belgium, but did not disclose any financial details of those deals. Coming up, new research may offer some hope when it comes to restoring degraded coral reefs. Stay tuned, that story is just ahead. A dire warning about the risk of a mass coral bleaching event has marine biologists on high alert. The U.S. National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration says the world is on the verge of a 4th mass coral bleaching event, which could see wide swaths of tropical reefs die, including parts of Australia's Great Barrier Reef. The scientific agency issued the warning after months of record-breaking ocean heat, which has some scientists fearing the worst. Derek Manzello, the coordinator of NOAA's Coral Reef Watch, said, quote, "We are literally sitting on the cusp of the worst bleaching event in the history of the planet." Scientists say the seasonal El Niño weather pattern, which leads to warmer ocean waters, may be a contributing factor. Researchers say when corals are subjected to heat stress, they expel the colorful algae living in their tissues. Without these helpful algae, the corals become pale and are vulnerable to starvation and disease. Now, to merit a global mass bleaching event, a certain percentage of reefs need to reveal a level of heat stress in the ocean basins of the Atlantic, Pacific, and Indian. However, NOAA says they're still waiting for final confirmation from Indian Ocean scientists to officially raise the flag for the 4th mass bleaching event. The last global mass coral bleaching event happened from 2014 to 2017. Preliminary results suggest during that time frame, about 15% of the world's reefs saw large coral die-offs, and the Great Barrier Reef in Australia lost nearly a third of its corals. Previous global bleaching events occurred in 2010 and 1998. While concerns are growing, the world could see a 4th mass coral bleaching event. A recent study may offer some hope when it comes to coral restoration. In a new paper, scientists from the University of Exeter, in conjunction with a group of international researchers, revealed planting new coral in degraded reefs can lead to rapid recovery, with restored reefs growing as fast as healthy reefs within just 4 years. Joining us now to discuss is the report's lead author, marine biologist, coral reef ecologist, and senior research fellow at the University of Exeter in the UK, Dr. Inez Lang. Dr. Inez, thank you so much for coming on. So this study, it was a collaborative effort between your team and others. Who else was involved, and what did this study tell you about coral's resiliency?
So our team consisted of Indonesian researchers and UK-based researchers from different universities. And we all went out together to Pulau Buntusua, which is a small island off the south of the coast of South Sulawesi in Indonesia, to study a very successful reef restoration program out there and to have a look if reef restoration can bring back the important functions of a coral reef.
So what's really incredible is, as part of this study, scientists said they were able to successfully restore a 50-meter-long section of a reef in Indonesia. Can you tell us about that effort and whether there were any signs of recovery until now?
Yeah, so the reef area we saw recovered is like much bigger than that. It's several hectares already. We studied smaller sections of the reefs to see the trajectory. So we studied reefs that were restored only a few months ago, a year ago, 2 years ago, 4 years ago. So we really could see the timeline of recovery on these reefs. And it's incredible to see that after 4 years, it's difficult to distinguish the restoration sites from the healthy reefs nearby. There's only an occasional glimpse of some steel structure looking out, but otherwise it's as diverse and colorful and full of fish as nearby healthy reefs.
So NOAA issued a warning that the world could be on the verge of a fourth mass coral bleaching event. Are you concerned that about this, given the positive results that you were seeing in Indonesia?
Of course, I'm very concerned, as everyone else. Climate change and bleaching is the major threat to coral reefs worldwide, and the scale of damage that it causes cannot be repaired by reef restoration projects. However, we think that that doesn't mean we shouldn't put effort and research into restoration projects, because they can have an immense impact locally and on a regional scale. So the reefs that were restored in Indonesia, for example, they have a massive benefits for the local communities. So we shouldn't not put research into reef restoration just because we don't think it can help all the reefs around the world.
One of the reefs restored spelled out the word hope. What are your expectations for the future of the world's coral reefs?
That is very hard to say. Unfortunately, despite seeing these glimpses of hope, and I've also seen very fast recovery from the last bleaching event. So there is pockets of hope and reefs that are doing better and positive stories to tell, and I think it's important. But in general, the situations for reefs worldwide is very dire, and we are seeing more and more mass bleaching events. And if we don't manage to get temperatures in control and manage our CO2 emissions, then reefs will not have a good chance to survive in a meaningful scale.
Dr. Inez Lang, thank you for joining us, and thank you for the work that you're doing with coral reefs.
Thank you for having me.
Coming up, an update on the ongoing release of treated radioactive wastewater from Japan's Fukushima nuclear plant. Stay tuned, that story is just ahead. The UN nuclear chief recently went to Japan and got a first-hand look at the ongoing release of treated radioactive wastewater at the Fukushima nuclear plant. Chris Gilbert has more.
Rafael Grossi has visited Fukushima 4 times, but this is the first inspection of Japan's wastewater discharge since it began in August last year. The project got the green light from the IAEA, which says it meets international regulatory and safety standards. Japan's government says it's committed to cooperating with the watchdog as it monitors the decommissioning of the Fukushima plant, which is expected to take decades to complete.
The decommissioning is a long-term effort that is unprecedented in the world. In order to complete it, the operators need to take thorough measures to prevent more problems and to further improve safety with a sense of urgency.
The assurances have not comforted Japan's neighbors. China remains opposed to the water discharge and has placed a blanket ban on Japanese seafood in response. It's concerned about a radionuclide called tritium, which cannot be cleaned from the water. So the treated waste is diluted with 1,000 times as much seawater before release. The mixture is tested before and after discharge for tritium levels, and the results corroborated by the IAEA and independent labs around the world. The IAEA says its satisfied test results show tritium levels well within international safety standards. But not everyone is convinced. and some say the water should have been turned into roading or evaporated. In Tokyo, locals have protested against the discharge and the government's pro-nuclear policies.
My parents were A-bomb survivors in Nagasaki, and I believe if we don't stop this as soon as possible, it will lead to a terrible disaster. We do not know whether our descendants will be healthy after 30 years of contaminated water.
The government is arguing nuclear power is a vital energy source for Japan to meet its carbon zero 2050 goals, and it's set to begin booting up idled reactors on the very same coastline as the stricken Fukushima plant as early as September. For EarthX, I'm Chris Gilbert.
Chris Gilbert, thank you. And before we leave you, EarthX TV's top bee expert created lots of buzz for his heroics at a big-time tennis tournament in California. Lance Davis, star of the show The Killer Bee Catcher on EarthX TV, was called an American hero on social media after he removed a swarm of bees hovering around a piece of camera equipment with a vacuum cleaner. And as fans of the show are familiar with, he did so without any protective gear. Lance's actions became the talk of the internet and news organizations around the globe, and even caught the attention of actor Ben Stiller, who posted, "Bee invasion guy is pretty cool. Fearless." The scene of Lance sucking up the bees was part of a larger bee invasion that halted play during the quarterfinals match between Carlos Alcaraz and Alexander Zverev for nearly 2 hours. Davis said a small swarm of roughly 3,500 bees took over a portion of the stadium because it's swarming season, so they go everywhere. And for all you bee lovers out there, not to worry, the bees Lance vacuumed up are set to be rehomed in one of the hundreds of beehives he maintains. Nice job, Lance. That's it for this edition of EarthX News. Please join us again next week. I'm Christina Thompson.